Now that you've seen the Pac-Man game migrated from AWS to GKE, and you see the high scores persisted in the new target cluster and still showing the old score from the AWS cluster. So we can similarly just reverse some of the arguments and migrate the application back. So let's go ahead and do that. So this time, instead of having the from context be AWS, we have the target to context be AWS. And the from context will be our Google cluster. So let's go ahead and run this and reverse what we just did. So again, it's going to export the Kubernetes resources in the Pac-Man namespace in the source cluster, and then import them in the target cluster, and then wait for those resources to be ready. And then once those resources are ready, it will create a Mongo replication set to replicate the data to our target cluster. And then once the data is up and available, it makes the routing change to update the DNS to point at our new service IP in our target cluster, in this case AWS. And then once the DNS changes are propagated successfully, we then delete the Pac-Man namespace in the source cluster. So last thing it does is updates the DNS, as you can see here, by making that change to point to the new dynamic DNS load balancer, the load balancer dynamic DNS that AWS provides. And after that's completed, we delete the Pac-Man namespace from the source cluster. So let's take a look at the current state. And what we'll end up seeing is that all of the Kubernetes resources have now migrated back to the AWS cluster. And you can see that our AWS cluster is now hosting our Pac-Man application, and our Google cluster has no resources. If we take a look at the DNS update that happened, we can see that our pacmanifont.labs.com is now pointing, it's now been updated to contain a CNAME DNS record type to point to the AWS load balancer dynamic DNS that's provided. So let's take a look at the game, and if we refresh this, we see that we're now running back on AWS. Let's go ahead and play around. Save Ivan3, view the high score, and we can see that Ivan3 running on AWS's cloud with a high score of 290 was persisted, and you can see the other two scores that were previously played in originally from AWS, then to Google Cloud, then back to AWS. Thanks for watching.